Shut up and sit down.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You still have distrust there.
We all come from very different places.
Man, we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
You deserve better.
People have to have the information in front of them.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
There you go. Like, just promote people who are doing something. Volunteer to work with people who you like. And
take an issue that's important to you and do something.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future.
The one, the only.
Fight for liberty. This is the cherry on top.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Fight for Liberty Live. I'm super excited about tonight's show. We have Mark Pellegrino coming back, but first we're going to talk a little bit about our sponsors like we always do. First up, Blood of Tyrants wine. If you guys are looking for a nice relaxing night in while also sipping on the blood of your enemies and enjoying a nice Cabernet, bloodoftyrants.wine is the site for you to go to. It is completely owned, operated, and run by people within the Liberty Movement, so every dime of the profit from this product is going back into the movement somehow. So go on over, bloodoftyrants.wine, order a couple bottles today. If you use the promo code F4L, you'll get $5 off your first order and help support the channel and the show and the network and everything else, so I'd really appreciate that. Next up, they are our oldest sponsor, but are still my favorite. Nuggofknowledge.com. If you guys are looking for some legal-ish cannabis things all across all 50 states, because we have Delta-8, CBD, CBG, a lot of these things are legal in most states. There's still some states that have cut it off, but we'll still ship it to you with you understanding that how the legality of that works. And, you know, you can get a little bit high no matter what state you live in. So nuggofknowledge.com. Promo code over there is FSM. Gets you that same $5 off your first order. And again, help support the show, the network, and libertarians that you know and love, like Dan Berman. But without further ado, we have an awesome guest for you guys tonight. He is a great actor from wonderful things like Supernatural, 13 Reasons Why, Tomorrow People, Lost, Dexter. He is a teacher from the Playhouse West, the founder of the American Capitalist Party, and most importantly for tonight's episode, the creator of Playhouse Paris. So, Mr. Mark Pellegrino, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. I would like to say, though, that my wife, Tracy Pellegrino, is the actual creator of Playhouse Paris.
Okay, well,
she's the brainchild. She's the brainchild and the force behind that school.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we'll get a lot of the how-tos a little bit further on in the show, because I definitely want to talk about how you came up with the idea and how she kind of was able to get it off the ground and going. But I do like to start off with a little bit of a getting our feet wet kind of question. So I'm curious, when did you realize that you had enough skill in this art to actually make a living out of it and continue on?
I think I'm still in the midst of realizing that. You know, it's always a challenge to take what you learn in the theater group or the classroom or the acting school that you try to learn your craft at, and then carry it over into the actual working world. Some people do it naturally and intuitively. Other people take several years to get there. And most everybody that I know, even the greatest actors that I've ever worked with, feel like they're still works in process. So I can't put myself in their category, but I definitely feel like I'm a work in process. And I feel like, you know, over the last few years, I give less of a shit. Can I just say that? Can I say that here? So Giving less of a shit is actually the antidote to a lot of, you know, what one would say bad acting. And bad acting happens when you're too self-conscious and you give too much of a shit. So the less you care about the result, the more fun you have and the more playful it is, even in the very serious scenes, I think the better for you. And that's what I'm finally learning in my 5th decade on this planet to bring to my work.
So what inspired you to turn around and start teaching the next generation in this art?
I wanted something at first. I wanted something to do in between projects, besides doing plays. Sometimes that takes a while, and I wanted to keep in the craft, not just doing plays, but teaching it and immersing myself in the ideas. And at first, I asked my mentor, Bob Carnegie at Playhouse West, if it was possible if I could teach. In the early '90s, like, no, you need to be out there working. And then finally, he gave in. I'm not sure why, and I started teaching, and just fell in love with it. So first, just the idea of keeping myself connected to craft at all times, because there's a lack of continuity in our business, and for LA actors especially. So, I'm always trying to be on stage and or teaching as much as possible to keep that continuity going. And then as I started teaching, I felt like I had sort of a knack for it. And the beautiful thing about acting, teaching acting too, but teaching acting is that you can, everything is grist for the mill, right? So history, politics, philosophy, ethics, all become part of the conversation when you're teaching acting. And I have a chance, I think, there to mold the hearts and minds of the next generation, maybe even more than an actual teacher or professor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Because what you guys are working on and doing ends up going out to, the masses and informing culture going forward. Like, I know there's so many like TV shows that I watched growing up that are huge parts of not only like my vocabulary, but my worldview. And, so I definitely agree. You guys have a specific way of reaching people that no other craft really does.
And that's true. And it would be great if more people were sort of in our mindset and more creative elements were in our mindset, because there's an awful lot of television shows that sort of give us the opposite perspective with respect to markets, wealth. They're always the bad guys. The company executives are always the murderers. I think there's a statistic somewhere out there that by the time somebody's 18, they've seen company executives kill something like 10,000 people on TV shows. So it's no big mystery why generation after generation has a rather awful opinion of capitalism and free markets, and think that we need to be shackled by, the political class.
Yeah. If only a few movies like War Games and V for Vendetta and, some of those other movies became as popular, or like those ideas were as popular in the art, we might be in a much better place.
Yeah, we might, and Dallas Buyers Club, where people get a chance to see, what the bureaucrats really do, they keep you from living. They don't sustain you. They're not safe. They hurt you more than anything else. And your life is better off in your own hands, not in somebody else's hands. So yeah, if we can get more movies that I don't know, demonstrate that rugged individualism isn't such a bad thing after all, maybe we'd be in a much better place.
So what's one of the lessons that you learn the most often while you're teaching? Kind of something that keeps recurring?
Sort of the thing that I started out with, that you have, didn't Mark Manson write a book like The Art of Not Giving a Fuck or something like that? That the more playful I can be, the freer I am, the less concerned I am about product, about outcome, results, the more accessible all this humanity that we all of us have in us is to me in that moment. Not to overburden and overwork something, but to be the simplest and most true that you can be. You always relearn that, because the business is very result oriented, very much driven by product, and they need ratings, of course, to stay on the air, and they need you to be good at what you do to keep the show going, and that all works against your instrument as an actor. And so the looser you can be in that environment, the more relaxed, the more carefree, the happier, the better.
Nice. Yeah, that's one of those lessons that I think you never stop learning, because you think that you like, I know, as a teenager, I thought that I was one of those like, kind of like edgy kind of kids that like, didn't really care about my reputation. And, I kind of had some of that in me. And then I realized that was actually just a lie and, a wall that I was putting up, and that I actually cared more about people thinking I didn't care than I actually didn't care. And I've kept learning that lesson over and over again. And I'm only 26. Like, I know that I'm going to continue to learn it a couple more times, and probably until I'm dead, and never fully grasp the art of just actually not giving a fuck.
There's a part of me that thinks, okay, you get enough philosophy and finally you understand where to put your focus, and that's the answer. And there's another part of me that thinks, well, I had plenty of philosophy in my 20s and 30s. I definitely have more now in my 50s. But there's another part of me that thinks you simply grow out of giving a fuck. Like it's too exhausting.
Yeah.
Right. It just wears you down. And after a while, you're like, okay, I'm too tired to care about that. So let me care about what matters. Yeah. And so maybe it's just something that you can't ever really escape until the hormones wear off, and until you reach the age where the threshold of bullshit, is oh, you're over it, you're done, and you're moving on. Yeah. I don't know.
So when you're starting to meet some students for the first time, what are some like key personality traits and like skills that you identify in a student that's going to be more successful than the rest?
They have to be ambitious. They have to be courageous. They have to be willing to fail a lot. That's a huge one. Like, you have to be willing to fail every time you get up there. Fall on your face. Say, it's okay, I'm going to fall on my face today. Mm-hmm. And the more you do that, the more successes you ironically have. So, and they need to be vulnerable, accessible while they're working, but also hard as a fucking rock, tough, because they're going to have to endure a lot of bullshit from people who don't understand them, and from a business that may not accept them for what they would like to be accepted as. And they have to get the sense that they have a lot of endurance. Like, they're not sprinters, man. They're ultra marathon runners, and they understand. And I also don't like hearing from them, what can I do to be successful? Because a lot of students ask me that. But it's a question that it wants the magic pill answer, which they never get. And they always have the puzzle, I'm not very satisfied by that answer look, which is just practice a lot. And, eventually luck and opportunity and all that practice are going to collide somewhere. I don't know where. It could be in your 60s. It could be 2 years from now. But it'll happen, and if it doesn't, you're working purely. And that's a hard pill to swallow, right? I had a kid who I mentor now. He's in his 20s, and his parents wanted him to go to law school. He graduated from university with a political science degree. They wanted him to go to law school. He's like, I want to be an actor. They didn't support that at all. He asked me what I thought. I said, well, if you think you can just feed yourself on the work and not necessarily be rich and have to work at other things and do this on the side, then yeah, act. But if you need all this material stuff and security, then follow that path, because this is an insecure business.
Yeah. I think it takes a lot to make that jump into an industry like that. And there's like the starving artist trope that pervades most art forms, and I feel like luckily, actually I don't know how positive this is, because there's a little bit of back and forth here, but I think my generation is doing better at like encouraging their kids into some of these art forms, but I almost don't know if it's like gonna end up being an oversaturation, and then we end up with the next generation is like way too artistic and not a single one knows how to fix a car. So we might have to like work a balance there. But with the previous generations, I dropped out of school, like business school, and went to culinary school. And, my parents, thankfully, were super supportive of that. But my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and like most of my parents' friends were all like, he's going to do what? Like, I was on track to have a $250,000 a year job in 5 years after graduation from like a nice university. And I just was like, no, let's be a chef instead. I'm going to start my own restaurant.
I love that. That's awesome. But have you seen The Bear? Speaking of,
which bear?
The Bear, the TV show, The Bear.
No, I don't think so.
You better watch it, because it's about a chef, man. It's awesome. I think it's one of the best shows on TV.
I will definitely have to go check that out. Coming from you, that's a high recommendation.
Great show, great show. Yeah. And I think because of your knowledge, it will especially appeal to you, because in many respects it's about excellence. And hey, man, I mean, I think chefs now, what chefs do, what they go through, the intensity of their focus, and even the science behind some of the more intense chefs out there is sort of common knowledge now with Chopped and Top Chef, right? All the, Hell's Kitchen. You see how intensely artistic and creative and forces of nature some of these chefs are. So it's no bullshit, man. That's a really, really intense craft that you chose. And you see that in this show where this kid takes over the family restaurant, which is sort of like a sandwich shop in Chicago, but he makes it into this thing. And he's like, it's great chef. And I love that. I love watching passionate artists who can't stop, they just, their will propels them through just about any obstacle that they face. It's awesome. Yeah. That's the kind of TV I like to see.
And I mean, that goes back to what you were talking about what you look for in a student, is that, just relentless passion and drive to succeed. It's always fun to watch.
Did you see the movie Whiplash?
I did not.
Must see movie, but it's got that element. Miles Teller plays an aspiring drummer. He goes to one of the top music schools in the country. CK, I'm just now blanking on his name, Simmons, from Juno and from great actor, won the Academy Award for this, as a matter of fact, is the very demanding master teacher, and puts this guy through an incredible amount of hell, searching for that Charlie Parker, that genius. And there's a line in there somewhere, because he's so hellish. Miles's character has to endure so much stuff. Like, what if he says, somebody says, I don't remember if it's the main character, if it's Miles or not, but somebody says, what if your teaching style destroys the potential Charlie Parker? What if you kill that guy because you're so harsh? And he goes, no, that Charlie Parker would never be discouraged, right? That genius, that drive, that thing that says, I will not quit, that thing, that X factor that makes the champion. That's what I like to see in actors, just like I like to see it in the ring or in athletics, or in a chef, somebody who won't stop, who pushes boundaries. It's cool.
So before we get into more about the school specifics, because I'm sure it'll come up, what exactly is the Meisner technique?
So Sandy Meisner was one of many teachers that came out of a theater company in the 30s and 40s, a very famous theater company called the Group Theater. And a number of the people in that particular theater, their mission was to bring original plays to Broadway that talked about, that spoke to the times, and they wanted to bring a realistic, naturalistic way of acting onto the stage that up to that time was not the experience of the American actor. Most acting was very mannered, right? Things were played. they wanted to approach it differently. And so a few of them studied with the great Stanislavski, who was sort of an integrator. He was in the Moscow Art Theater and an integrator of information. He basically took what the great actors of his time did to prepare for parts and sort of congealed it into a technique, which eventually became called the method, and then passed that on to some of these folks that were in the group theater. And a few of them took him at his exact word, like Lee Strasberg, and that became the famous method in America. And then Stella Adler went and studied with him in Paris, and he had modified his technique, and so she had a slightly different version, and Meisner had his own version, but they all come out from under the capes of Stanislavski. And Meisner's innovations, I think, are with respect to the way in which actors treat acting, the way in which they interact with each other, and the way in which they deal with the problem of self-consciousness which every actor has to deal with. And they deal with that by a particular exercises that Meisner made up. One is called the repetition exercise, which enables you to listen and learn to become very, very adept at listening, not just listening with your ears, but with everything, so that you're completely immersed in what the other person's saying and how they're saying it. And he specialized exercises in the art of doing, because acting is doing. So we do these exercises called activities, where you actually learn to really do things under imaginary circumstances, not fake, not pretend, but actually do them. Put yourself under those circumstances and do them. And so that's I think the stress in the Meisner technique is on listening and reacting and really doing, whereas the stresses in, say, Stella Adler would be in interpretation and characterization, and in the method under Lee Strasberg would be on internal emotional work and relaxation. Each one has its slightly different angle or approach to the same thing, which is trying to have a real experience in an imaginary circumstance and be authentic and be creative in the moment.
How did you become a follower of that technique and kind of choose it over the rest of them?
Well, I mean, it was sort of luck. I got an agent before I really knew anything about acting, and that agent gave me a list of 10 acting schools to go to, all reputable. I chose the cheapest one and the closest one, and that happened to be Playhouse West. But it also happened to be, I thought, probably the best acting school on the West Coast. I'm biased, I guess, but because the teacher went to the neighborhood playhouse and studied with Bill Alderson mostly. And also as a young man would go to Harold Clurman's nighttime sermons after Broadway productions. Harold Clurman, who is also one of the co-founders of the group theater and a great Broadway director in his own right and a theater critic, would give these lectures that people would go to, would pack houses, until 2:00 in the morning and listen to this guy talk. He was very inspirational, and he had benefited from the mind of Harold Clurman as well. And I got the benefit of all of that theatrical history from him. And then, of course, later in Sandy's life, Sandy Meisner stopped teaching in New York, and he stopped teaching in an island called Bequia, where he would teach in the summers. And he moved to Los Angeles, and he chose our school to teach. And I had the sort of blessing to be able to sit in his classes for the time that he was at Playhouse and watch the master himself teach acting and see how his teaching evolved to my teacher's approach to the work. And so it was luck, and that I ran into a deep bench, somebody who knew theater and acting and what good acting was, and that I also was able to cross paths with the great master himself and watch him teach and get a piece of his brain and soul to seed itself into my mind and grow or metastasize whatever happened with it. So it's a 2 parts luck, 1 part deliberation, I guess.
Nice. That's awesome that you were able to, get that much experience crammed down into just the first couple people that you studied under. That's
that's fortunate. I could have gone to a lot of places and gone through a lot of BS, or teachers who are good directors but didn't know how to reproduce, authentic work in you, right? And you need that. You need the tools to know how to get to where you need to go.
Yeah. So what inspired your wife and you to step out and create Playhouse Paris outside of Playhouse West?
Yeah, so I was asked to teach at the Paris Film Institute, and I wanted to bring my wife because she was teaching at Playhouse West with me, and I thought she was, probably one of the best teachers in California, particularly for a certain advanced aspects of the work. In the Meisner technique, we work on scenes and speeches in a sort of very unique way, through what we call spoon river work, and then we do nursery rhymes, which helps your creative faculty with respect to dialogue. It's a little complicated and difficult to explain, but it's a really hard part of the technique that she teaches very well. Most people can't do it because it's so hard, and she's able to get, I would say, 90% of the students to do very well in a very difficult part of the technique that I had, issues with as well, and that Sandy Meisner even stopped. He stopped doing what we call nursery rhymes because they were just too hard for people to do. And I don't think my teacher does them anymore. But she was, I wanted her to be a partner with me and teach because we complement each other very well. We co-teach very well. I say the things that she can't articulate. She articulates the things that I can't. She knows story well. I know certain things better than her. And as a combination, it's a great 1-2 punch. So we had this successful little group, and then students from that group formed a different school that was based on Meisner. Then we had a creative break with that person, who I'm in the midst of actually suing. And and then it's great. And then she started Playhouse Paris, and she's had to learn French, of course, because you have to learn French to get a visa over there, or if you have the intention of becoming a citizen, you have to learn the language. And she so she got an artist visa, which is a very hard thing to get, and she's an auto entrepreneur, I guess, registered with the bureaucracy of France as such, so she can earn money over there. And now every fall, spring and fall, basically are the times that the school is open, and we bring them in, we pack them in, and teach the kids how to act, and they're working like mad.
Nice. How did you guys go about kind of taking it from an idea to actual reality, like getting teachers and students in a location all kind of together?
Well, I mean, the good news is that I have a following because of my work, and that helps in advertising. And I have a pretty big social media presence, so that helps get the word out and advertise. And plus, in our first couple of times there teaching for the other schools, we developed relationships with the students, and they were so happy about what the technique was doing for their work. Not only their work, I mean, acting. Yeah, as you can tell by what I said in the opening sort of salvo here, the art of not giving a fuck. It's a spiritual journey, right? It's more about knocking shit off and away from you and freeing yourself up to be the best instrument you possibly can be. And that's a spiritual journey, and people get very inspired by that. And so you build up a crowd of folks that are into that journey, and also notice that, hey, I'm getting work now too, and I wasn't before. And then that grows by word of mouth, and and advertising here and there, and then more word of mouth. And then people come and audit your class, and they think it's interesting. And I go there in the spring and actually work on stage with people, because they need to see where things go, right? They for a beginning acting student who thinks, I should be doing, a Shakespeare monologue. I should be playing Hamlet, man. What the fuck am I doing? Sitting here watching people say, you look upset, and repeating that back and forth. That's worthless. It doesn't do me any good. But if I get up there and play that game with them, they see that it actually, there's a point to it. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I think it's because they see that it's not a mechanical exercise, but actually a listening exercise that really does make you susceptible to and vulnerable to what the other person's doing. And a perfect example of this, I can't give this away, but I had a scene yesterday that I was shooting that because of what was happening to the other actor in the scene, spontaneously made me do something that I never would have guessed in a million years would happen. Every time that he did it, my reactions off of him were powerful enough that they shifted the cameras around and planned to do a whole other sequence because of that. And that comes from the practice of taking somebody so seriously and being so open and vulnerable to what's happening to them as if it's a reality, that you automatically react like you would in life. And that's what they see, I think, when if I get up there and do a scene with them, or if I get up there and play with the activity exercise or the repetition exercise, they get to see where it's going.
Yeah, I know as far as like the crafts that I have learned, it's always better to see the teacher kind of doing the thing, and like you mentioned, it kind of legitimizes it as not just like a meaningless, repetitive, like kind of memorization stuff, but actually like, this is a skill that you need and a practice that is going to help hone this skill. And even when you're a great professional that's made it, you're still going to be doing these exercises and practicing and just kind of making sure that you're still there. I think that goes a long way.
It does. You're right. It's not always the case that a very good teacher is also a very good actor. A very good teacher could suck at acting, but he could be a great teacher and a great director, and a very great actor could, could not potentially teach it. But it's great if you see a good actor who can also bring what he's doing to you and make it accessible to you. Who used to talk in a way that I just loved? Philip Seymour Hoffman. I would read interviews with him, and I'd say, like, fuck, I felt like this guy and I were twins, like mentally, acting wise, at least twins mentally. We thought the same way about what acting was. Maybe him even more clearly than me, but I could see him. He was the director of the Labyrinth Theater too, and I could see him teaching and making acting accessible, right? And demystifying the process. And that's inspiring. I remember doing a reading of I think it was Rocket to the Moon at Jeff Goldblum's house, and Ed Asner was there, and a bunch of some actors from Playhouse, and then there was this teacher, I won't name her name. She's sort of a famous acting teacher in Santa Monica, and she was unbearable to watch, like unbearable. And I'd think to myself, I would be frightened to be her student, because the way she's reading this right now is unbearable. And it would make me question her taste, her capacity, her understanding, because she claimed to be a Meisner teacher as well. And she was not reading text in a very Meisner way. And she could have been nervous, or something. Any number of problems could have presented themselves to her that she couldn't overcome in the moment. But still, it's nice when you see a teacher who can do it. Like, that was one of the great things about always working with Jeff Goldblum, because he was a teacher and he could do it. And he liked rehearsing in public. There was no shame, like no fear about looking bad, ever. And I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot about not giving a fuck, about messing up from him, even though I never really saw him mess up. I just saw him, we rehearsed a play called The Exonerated that he did on Broadway, and then we did it for a few months at Playhouse. But he wanted the whole rehearsal process to be open. Now, normally a rehearsal is closed. Actors don't want, the audiences to see the cracks, for crying out loud. They want the final performance. But he would open up the rehearsal to the whole school. So every rehearsal we had would be packed out to the rafters with people watching us rehearse this damn thing.
That sounds so unnerving.
Right? It's potentially unnerving, but the great thing about it was I gave a shit about it and learned not to. Like, I even when we did Twelfth Night, which was the last play I did at Playhouse West, I had just come off of a show that I'd done for a whole season, and I hadn't even worked on the play. I mean, I'd been working on the lines. I hadn't done them with anybody. I was playing Malvolio. It's sort of a famous part. Lots of amazing actors have played that part. It's sort of the Hamlet of that particular play. And I said, when we had 2 run-through rehearsals before we were going to actually put it up. And I'm like, let's bring people in. What the heck? I haven't even done it with anybody. And I just made the announcement, right before. I'm like, guys, this is first time on stage doing this. So if I mess up, I apologize. But I'm just going to play around and see what happens. And that's exactly what I did. And you know what? It was a humbling experience, but in a good way. I hate that term, humble, self-effacing. I hate all that crap. But it got me off of any bad ego about acting and put me in the exact right place I needed to be, which is having freaking fun.
Yeah,
it's a play, right? It's called a play.
Yeah,
even Hamlet is a play.
Yeah. Even the tragedies.
Yes. And you know what? You're more accessible to that darkness when you're playing. You're much more accessible to that than if you're trying to hit the fucking mark. I don't know if you've ever read Zen and the Art of Archery.
Yes.
Great book, right? Fantastic book. And what's the guy's problem? What does he have to learn to do? He has to learn to not try to hit the target so hard, right? He has to let his instincts flow. He has to be sort of one with the thing. And the target, it's about hitting the target in him, and then the target finds itself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I had the benefit of having one of the U.S. Olympic team archery coaches be the archery instructor at my Christian summer camp in bumfuck nowhere, Western New York, my entire childhood. And when I was a counselor, most of the time I was one of his assistants on the archery range, and I got to learn just so much from him. And he was the person that showed me that book first of all. And he would, especially with the older kids, he would fire an entire quiver of arrows, making eye contact with one of the kids standing in front of him, targets down this way, and just shoot and just complete eye contact with a kid. And, all of them, at least somewhere in the yellow, just an amazing shot that no one could make, especially out of these high schoolers. And they're just mind blown by the fact that he didn't have to give it that concentration and stare down and do all the aiming. It was just about that feeling and just being in the moment. It's very blessed to have that kind of instruction early on in life.
That's great instruction. And it's great. And you have that experience. And once you have that experience, it's an epiphany, right? It's a shift. I forget there's a name for that. What is that? There's a name when you have there's a name for having that psychological shift that completely changes your perspective. But that's what you had in that moment. And that's what I have when I'm feeling that inner Zen thing, when you're in a scene with somebody and you're free, you're surfing the wave, you're letting it take you wherever it does. It's such a beautiful feeling, man.
Yeah. I'm glad you used the term spiritual journey earlier to about the learning how to do this, because I feel like it's something that not a lot of people get the benefit of having a spiritual journey with a mentor that's actually, trying to make them a better person in the process and bring them further in life. Most career choices that you can have, they're just, maybe you get some sort of like hands-on training. Most likely you don't. It's like a 2-week onboarding process, and you've got a manager that kind of sort of gives a shit about you, but mostly just cares about what numbers you put out. And it's hard to, especially as an adult, once you're out of college, away from any kind of like summer camp age or anything like that, you just don't have those opportunities a lot of times to have someone come alongside you and go through that spiritual journey. So it's great that your students are able to actually have that with you in your school.
And in a way, it's because I didn't have that, right? I didn't have a father to take me through, the steps of what it is to be a man. And I missed that. And it made me search for mentors my whole life, guides, philosophers, thinkers, psychologists, teachers to help me figure it all out. And some were more involved than others. Even my acting mentor, I can't call him a mentor, he's my acting teacher. But I take it further with students because I don't want them to waste time, right? You waste time worrying about things that don't matter, and it's good to have somebody in your life who can help you with that, right? Who can help you see beyond that, so that maybe you get over it much quicker than you would ordinarily without that person guiding you through the obstacles.
Yeah, I ended up, because I chose a more corporate, life path in the end, I ended up having to find a lot of these kind of like mentor figures in like very weird random ways, which, I'm very happy to have a couple of people in my life, especially, politics has given me a little bit more of that connection with people on a more personal level and not just, a workplace kind of thing. And so, like someone like Spike Cohen, I can look up to as a good mentor, but it's, like I said, I feel like it's very difficult to find, and it's not as like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like guaranteed, I should say. It's not a next step in life. Like, you go from like elementary school to middle school to high school to college, and then, maybe grad school, and then you just kind of like fall off, and there is no next step that, you just take. And then you go and you get this mentor who helps you through becoming a father and a husband and like all of that other shit that like no one prepares you for, and you're just off on your own.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah. So I'm curious how we can foster more of that kind of like teaching of the next generation mentality. Cause there's like that phrase, like those who can't do teach. And sometimes this very like negative connotation on taking a step back from your career to help somebody else's career that I think just shouldn't exist. And, you're a great example of why someone can do both and, be very beneficial to society in both aspects. I'm curious, how do you think we can help kind of beat back that mentality?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I can tell you what it is for me, though. And teaching is a profoundly selfish act. It's like art is a profoundly selfish pursuit. Acting is a profoundly selfish pursuit, and you won't hear that anywhere else, I think, but from me. And I say that because to be an act, I don't consider myself an artist. I consider myself an aspiring, artist type guy. But the artist, is claiming certain values, right? Now, I don't have the capacity to act everything that I would like to act. I'm working on writing my own stuff that I think is more in alignment with my worldview. But the pursuit of excellence or doing something as best as you possibly can, and having that experience of achieving it to the best of your ability is it's a reward. It serves your self-esteem. It builds your pride. And being in constant contact with the concepts of acting and turning them around and trying to explain them in ways that are accessible to people, some of whom don't even understand English that well, and are very, you know, these concepts are alien to them, and to make it accessible to them, well, that's a gift to me too. It helps my conceptual grasp of the truth. And then when I see the light in their eyes, that's an achievement as well. And when I get up there with them and I see them implementing these things that I'm teaching them, and they're doing it amazingly, and I watch them grow as human beings on stage from, you know, timid to, you know, to explosive and passionate, and then that bleeds into their everyday life where they become assertive and in a good way, not like a narcissistic actor way, but like assertive in a way that's, you know, that shows self-esteem and pride in what they do and in their craft. That's an achievement for me. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I'm not sure how that relates exactly to the question of changing the culture of respecting teachers more. I mean, there was a time, you know, I guess during the Greek Golden Age, you know, and some Roman times when, you know, teachers were esteemed very highly, mm-hmm. you know, and even in the, you know, the founding days of America, you know, the teachers that taught our founding generation were esteemed very highly, and the men themselves eventually became great wise men and esteemed very highly. And perhaps it's about, you know, shifting our focus to wisdom more than whatever else it's focused on now.
Knowledge, kind of. It's not even super focused on knowledge, but like, I mean, I guess our education system is definitely more, you know, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, not like, you know, how to get in touch with yourself as a person. But yeah, I would definitely agree that, you know, we should be respecting that our wiser elders who are, you know, passing on that information a little bit more. I was definitely one of those, you know, rebellious type kids that did not respect that very much growing up, and have learned to kind of, you know, have actually quite a few regrets of how many people I dismissed as a kid, and, you know, value some of the teaching that I got as a younger person a lot more.
When you really think about it too, that rebelliousness is almost a cliche. I mean, that's actually just sort of normal. Mm-hmm. You know, the rebel is the one that recognizes the wisdom in the older person and listens to it and allows that mentorship to take them somewhere. But that takes a long time. We're all a bunch of goofballs, and, you know, I don't know when the goofballness goes away. Sometimes I guess after you pass your 20s or 30s, when you have kids, or, you know, something does an internal shift where you start to see the world in more mature terms. But I mean, I look back at myself in my 20s, and people's impression of me in my 20s as being so morose and dark, and I think, God, I thought that was deep. It's not. It's, you know, moroseness isn't poetic. It's not deep. It's kind of superficial, to be honest with you. It's really hard to find joy. That's what's hard. That's what's deep. Mm-hmm. You know, to find joy and wisdom, to find joy in every day, to find joy in creation. You know, it's much easier to be dour.
Yeah.
And, you know, and not rebellious. It's not rebellious wearing all black, you know, and putting on your goth makeup. You're just in a costume with other people, right? The punk rock. I was in the punk rock movement. You know, the punk rockers. You're all wearing a fucking costume. You pretend to be nonconformists, but mm-hmm. you're not.
Yeah.
You just have a different conformity, you know. So,
man.
Yeah, man.
That's a good fucking point. Yeah, the punk rock uniform, you know.
like I feel like so many great actors out there, great fucking actors I love watching. They're so good and soulful up there. They have the most cliche, mundane ethics. They're such fucking conformists, and they come at you with such self-righteousness, and their fucking ideas are so pedantic. They're so boring, and they're so conformist. And you're like, You're the fucking rebel? Yeah, what the fuck? You're not a rebel.
Yeah.
You're not a rebel, man. It takes a lot of fucking guts to be a rebel. That means really standing outside the fray, the mob. Like we have mobs now, like nobody's business. They're viral mobs. And to stand up to millions of fucking people, not just your community, like in Gibson's play Enemy of the People, where a guy has to stand up against his community and for the truth. You have to stand up against millions of eggheads, screaming, whining, freaky zombie eggheads who want to kill you, who want to take your fucking job away from you and cancel you because you have the fucking temerity to say you're wrong and I'm not going to take your shit.
Yeah,
that's the fucking rebel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really disheartening to see bands like Green Day and Rage Against the Machine just peddling government propaganda and bullshit and this very quick all of those there's lyrics in Green Day songs that if you actually understand them should lead you to believe something completely different than what they're saying now, and it's so disheartening to see so many of these people just end up being exactly what they claimed they were rebelling against or different from or shining a light on.
And you know what? And I wonder how much of that is they're afraid of losing their wealth and their status and their fame, because that can happen when you take a stand against untruth, and untruth is the landscape. It's the moral landscape, and you're the only one saying the emperor has no clothes, or you're one of a few, and those few are getting fucking knocked off, and everybody's seeing that, and they're fucking scared. Well, and nobody's immune from that possibility. You can put your tail between your legs and run, but don't call yourself a rock star, pal. You ain't a rock star. Rock stars are supposed to be, they're supposed to say this to authority.
Yeah. Have you experienced any repercussions in your own career from kind of your outspoken political stances?
I mean, I've had fans call convention promoters and say they felt very unsafe with me there. They felt unsafe with me there, and they wanted me to be canceled from some conventions because of my outspoken stance for liberty. I don't know how that is really. I don't know how marginalizing violence is a freaky thing to somebody that makes them feel unsafe, but somehow that's what they get from me, or something like that. And I have had them persistently do that, but the people who work with me know that I'm not an unsafe asshole, and they know that I'm none of the things that these jerk offs are claiming I am. And I'm sure they've written networks and producers, and it may have an effect somewhere down the line, or even now, for all I know, because there's very little testicular matter out there when it comes to this stuff. People are fucking little scaredy cats when they should be standing up and saying, fuck you, I like the guy, he's not that, I know he's not that, you're wrong, you're lying, and we're going to go ahead with this because you're just a loud minority of people with 60 billion sock accounts trying to make yourself look like you're more than you are. So I mean, the long and the short of it is most people, I'm open about my political beliefs, and because I'm not establishment right, they can't classify me as that jerk off. I'm not establishment left, so the other side, what little there is of it in Hollywood, can't classify me as those jerk offs. And when they actually listen to the things that I say, and many of them do, I mean, Hollywood gets a pretty bad rap, but a lot of the actors that I know, even the passionately committed ones and political ones, are pretty fucking open to actual dialogue. When you're not talking at them, when you're rational, and I'd say 98% of the time when I'm having discussions with my actor friends about stuff like politics, they'll be like, I never thought of it that way, but I think you're right. So
it enables a lot more of a dialogue when you don't ascribe to a particular label. Even now, libertarian isn't that popular of a label, but I've started to drop it just It seems kind of backwards, but as it's become slightly more popular, I've started to not use it as much because I enjoy the question mark that people have when they do start to have a real dialogue with me, that they can't quickly put me in a box and think they understand everything about me. So they actually have to have a dialogue with me and understand where I stand. You know, if I was a Republican, any Democrat that I talked to would just instantly write me off as, oh, well, you're just a Republican. But I'm able to have conversations about like deregulation with a Democrat because they are open to hearing, well, if you're not a Republican, but you're not one of me, and you're not green or something like that, like what exactly are you? Where do you stand on this? How do you come to that conclusion? Because it's not just spoon-fed to you by a party establishment. And I actually get to have that dialogue. You know, it makes it a lot easier if they come at it without any preconceived notions.
It does. I mean, they still try to pigeonhole you because it's hard for them to think outside the box, and they don't really see anything besides the establishment. And they don't think there is really any alternative to what they've known their entire lives. And that comes in part from not knowing that much about history and not knowing that it actually hasn't always been this way, and that it's possible to not return to something, but to expand on what was good about that time and re-implement it today. As far as libertarians go, I mean, if you follow my feed, you know I have issues with libertarians big time, and I've done a reality check on anarchy. And I feel that the libertarian intellectuals, the people that are in sort of control of where the movement goes, as much as I love listening to many of them, and I love reading their stuff, a lot of them, but they are anarchists when push comes to shove. And I think that is a big loser for a lot of really rational reasons. And it's going to be hard. I think it's the other side of the statist coin. It's like, you know, we have the left and right who are saying the state should have command over the individual. None of them are saying the individual is the primary unit of society. They all have their collectives, and the state sort of stands in for the collective and fucks you for the collective. But then the libertarians are like, well, the state is just inherently bad. No, the state isn't inherently bad, like a gun isn't inherently bad. It has a potentiality that is entirely governed by the values of the user, right? And when our founders developed this great country on some amazing principles, Enlightenment principles, we have to remember the Enlightenment was a mixed bag philosophically and ethically, a very mixed bag. Yeah. And a lot of that mixedness from Locke to Rousseau got mixed up in our founding and created some inherent paradoxes in the way our government was created that leave room for that badness, those bad values that can be a part of human nature to enter into the political sphere. And when that happens, when those aren't strictly barred, you have people who have control of the gun who are nuts, which is sort of the way it is now. But the anarchists are like the anti-gun guys. They want to throw the fucking gun out and say the gun itself is bad. No, it isn't. It's the values that are bad. It's the governing values. It's the lack of consistent individualism that's bad. It's libertarians not understanding what liberty means, not understanding its connection to reason, and so thinking and so equating liberty with libertinism. I mean, the conversations I have with people are insane.
Oh yeah.
Like they say, no, if somebody's convicted of a murder, you can't haul him off to jail. You're violating his rights by using force against him. I'm sorry, what? No, you can't do that. And you know what? It's legitimate if a parent decides to stop feeding their kid, that they can do that. You can't tell them they can't.
Yeah.
What? I'm sorry, what? Or if somebody is adjudicated as legally insane, you can't commit them. I'm sorry, what? There's no connection of the concept of liberty, freedom from force, and its connection to the reason we need to be free from force, which is so that we can act rationally. That means that we can be irrational too.
Yeah.
And we can fuck up. But when you do that to yourself, well, you pay the price for it. When you do it to somebody else, it's called a crime, and we put you in fucking jail, or whatever we do to make the victim of that irrationality whole.
Yeah.
But I don't see libertarians I don't see them answering those questions properly. And I think I listened to a lot of them.
I think personally my problem with the movement is how many times we try to answer some of those questions in general. I think that there's way too much emphasis put on the thought experiment of like how it would work, how anarchy could work, instead of just working on limiting how much the state is actively like murdering and harming people on a regular basis here and now. Like that's, I feel like, just a much more reasonable effort to be putting in. And because most people in the movement don't believe that we'll get to some beautiful anarchist utopia within our lifetimes. So if the whole goal is just slowly rolling back the state, why not actually start rolling back the state instead of talking about what our great grandkids might have to deal with because they don't have a state? But
I think the temptations are there because in the end, people want to know what a consistently practiced philosophy is going to do. What's its end, right? So, and to me, anarchy is sort of, and libertarianism is an attempt to disconnect politics and ethics, which is an impossibility. And that's why there's so many bizarre combinations of people that call themselves libertarian.
Yeah.
It's because they're disconnected from ethics. You can't possibly be for liberty and a communist. I'm sorry, you're not. You can't be. You can't be a Nazi and simultaneously for liberty. You can't be an Islamist and simultaneously for liberty. You simply can't. You can't be a number of things that still somehow find themselves nestled under the umbrella of libertarianism.
Yeah.
Because of its amorality. Well, that's what politics is. Politics is social morality.
Yeah.
And what you need is a purely individualist morality, which I don't think the libertarians do a very good job at explaining or identifying as the core moral principle. They actually make an axiom, the non-aggression principle, an axiom, which it isn't. It's not an axiom. It's a derivative principle based on things that they're not acknowledging. So until they straighten out that epistemological, ethical shit, I don't think they're going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, some of the ones that just want to make government, less intrusive and less violent to us, that's cool. That's cool. But you got to get on the moral train. You got to understand that politics is ethics in society, and that the laws that we create reflect a standard of good and bad, and the relationships that should be between individuals, and that you can encode these things and you can make them fairly seamless, so that everybody's sovereign and the government isn't initiating force against people. I mean, it sort of happened that way, even though we had big paradoxes in our society. I mean, we were fucking up from the beginning, but there were aspects that really did have these elements to it, where people could be fairly sovereign and the government sort of left them alone.
Yeah.
And we could do that. We could do that today.
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to get a lot of heat for this comment, but I think the libertarians and anarchists need to better separate themselves in a way, and we need less like hardcore anarchists as like public faces of the Libertarian Party, because I think that in and of itself is a paradox. You can't be an anti-politics political party. It just doesn't work. You can't be a decentralized, centralized committee like that. It just doesn't work. So if we let the minarchists and libertarians and people who we like anarchists might think are just haven't figured it out yet, or still a little bit wrong, or whatever they might think about them, kind of let them still be the face of the LP. Because if you're trying to get somebody to vote for you, anarchy is never a good sales pitch. I mean, like I do classify myself as an anarchist, but I understand that there's a lot of things about it that are unpalatable for people. And, you know, when I do try to talk to somebody about it, you know, I'm talking about the like real active ways that the government's involved in their lives. I'm talking about like certificate of need laws stopping new hospitals from being built, or, you know, occupational licensing laws is something I talk about a lot, where it's just like, you can't make a meal and sell it to your neighbor legally. It's just not a thing anymore. Like, we can't do that.
Right.
That's fucked up.
You can't have a freaking lemonade stand anymore as a kid on a corner and sell lemonade to people. Yeah, I mean, but to me, those are capitalist ideas. Not, you know, they may overlap with some aspects of anarchism, but capitalism itself is grounded in ethics. It's grounded in individual rights. And I don't see any anarchist system, well, we could probably discuss this for days, and it's probably not the topic that you wanted to get to, but I don't see any anarchist system based in individual rights at all. And that is what is frightening. And I can see that always devolving into multiple malignant force arrangements that and sort of perpetual warfare. Because I can't say this. I mean, you seem objective, but I've talked to lots of anarchists who have fucking written books, for crying out loud, who are not objective about force at all, and they have notions of rights that scare me. Like, that they're just so perverse that it's almost impossible for a rational person to wrap their minds around it, and that yet this person is saying, I want to be judge and jury in my life, and that may include you. And I hate force monopolies, and I say to them, well, every act of force is an attempt at monopoly. When somebody breaks into your fucking house, somebody's going to win that fight, and somebody is going to assert their will over the other in a force monopoly. So you can't help but force is always a monopoly. The question is, are we going to delegate it to an organization governed by objective rules, like objective known rules that can only retaliate? Or are we going to leave it in the hands of, you know, everybody's separate notion, subjective notion of what adequate amount of responsive force is to something that comes into their sphere? And it seems like that's what they want. They think that is what's effective to them. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to tolerate the Islamist force company in my next door neighbor's house. I'm not going to fucking tolerate it. I'm not going to watch him stone his wife to death in his backyard. Not going to happen. I'm going to shoot him in the head. All right, and that's where it goes.
Yeah, I think there needs to be. That's why I also really dislike the kind of right-wing / libertarian hatred for cancel culture, because I dislike how it's being done right now. Obviously, you know, like the Kevin Hart shit, and like how they're just like digging way back. Like, obviously there's problems there, but the root idea that is cancel culture is the only real argument we have for how we would deter bad behavior without a state force or some other type of force. Like, it's really the only other option that we have would be some sort of cancel culture where, like, you know, if you're being a terrible person, no one's going to interact with you, no one's going to do business with you, you get canceled. If you're you know, if we don't have solid regulations on business and a company decides that they want to put harmful materials into their food, you have to just cancel them as a company and make it widely known that they're doing this thing. And it would look very similar to cancel culture now. That's really like the only thing we have as an alternative to someone like a police or the, you know, the health department coming in and saying something. And
I mean, I'm for that. I'm on your page in that respect, and I've been saying that for a long time. And when I've been asked that question, what do you think of cancel culture? I think it is cancel culture qua canceling bad things is actually good. It's actually necessary. We should cancel Nazis. Okay. It's just that those words are being thrown around and foisted onto people who don't deserve them. So there's tons of unjust cancellations going on because people are in like hyperbole mode. Everything is a tragedy and a trauma, and they're attacking people who don't deserve to be attacked. So it's being used in ways that are very unjust. But of course it's appropriate to cancel bad guys. Yeah, man. But are they really bad? I almost got canceled for defending a guy before the Me Too movement who was accused of sexual harassment of somebody at a convention. Now, all I did was jump on. He'd been harassed for a year and a half, and the accusations kept growing and growing and growing until it was like 100 women that complained, and even started making accusations that were patently impossible, like that he had exposed himself during a karaoke event at a convention where there are 2,000 people, cameras rolling everywhere, and people with their phones like this. And you mean to tell me there's no evidence of this? Anyway, I didn't attack any of that. All I said was, you guys are destroying a man's reputation online. If you have a real criminal complaint against this person, you should file it with the police and let them investigate it. You don't try him in the court of social media, destroy his entire career, which they ended up doing, and then came after me because I defended due process. I'm like, don't be a lynch mob. Due process is subordinating that desire for revenge, delegating that revenge to someone who's objective and can look at the evidence in a way that you can't. And that's what we should be doing here. Flash forward a year and a half later, after they'd ruined his fucking life, the original accuser came out and said she was lying. She came out on social media and said I was lying. I'm totally ashamed. I felt a sense of community and identity with people who helped, like came to me and tried to help me. And then it became a whole movement. And this guy would be sending me pictures of the latest accuser. It's like, this person, so-and-so raped me in like Minnesota. It's like, Mark, I've never been there. Never been to that state in my life. And that's just horrible, hysterical insanity. But canceling, sorry, I just got knocked my earplugs out. Canceling Nazis, canceling communists. Yeah, why not? Sure. They're bad. They're bad people. They don't like humanity. They murder, they destroy, they break things. They break your spirit. They break your soul. They break your property. They take shit. Yeah, they're bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with the sentiment you were referencing about like the delegating revenge kind of thing, because revenge is always going to escalate. You're never going to actually reciprocate exact. It's never a thing. Even like siblings, if your sister pokes you, you punch her back. Like that's just how revenge and that kind of stuff works. So there's no end to an escalating battle like that.
Hey, we just had something like this with Cain Velasquez. You know who Cain Velasquez is? He's like the two-time. Yeah, he was like a two-time heavyweight champion of the UFC. Okay. He's a very bad man, but it's apparently a super sweet dude. But he's like a freaking monster, like specimen of a human being. He found out that his kid had been molested multiple times at this daycare center, and by the stepson or something of the owners of the daycare center. And he discovered that this guy got out on bail and was on his way to court to get an ankle bracelet on because he was just going to be in house arrest, I guess, until some criminal case could be worked up. And he went in his car and took a shot with a gun and shot at the guy, shot the stepfather, injured him, but missed the guy. And then spent 8 months in jail, away from his son, who probably really needed him at that moment, since the accusations were apparently true. And that's where, anarchy might allow that kind of thing. You know, if you get a force agency that says, I'm going to do it, then they'll do it. Or even him doing it himself may not be looked upon by a jury of anarchists as necessarily bad, even though we haven't gone through a due process. We haven't looked at the evidence. We can't clearly say beyond a reasonable doubt that this thing happened. And of course, the revenge that he tried to serve up ended up, reflecting back on him in a very tragic, horrible way. And now he's the criminal facing terrible charges that will really affect his relationship with his son, who needs him right now to be by his side to help him through this stuff.
Yeah.
Revenge. It's understandable, but we have civilization. Civilization is about mitigating violence. It's about restraining violence and putting it in a box that says I can only retaliate. And for human beings, when the police aren't there to help us, we have the right to retaliate as fully as possible, until the threat is over with. That's our right. But after that, let due process happen so that everybody's rights are still protected, right? That's how you protect rights. You subordinate violence to rights.
Yeah.
And I don't see any anarchist situation where that is possible.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I think to get to any sort of anarchist utopia, we'd have to put psilocybin in the water supply for multiple years.
And that's scary, right? When you have when you have that rationalist idea of utopia, it's not connected to the ground. Your feet aren't touching the ground. It's like a Marxist stateless communist utopia. It's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it can't happen. It's not tethered in human nature. It's not tethered in human needs. It's not tethered in human conditions. And if that's not going to be the case, it ain't going to happen. It's going to cause a lot of pain and a lot of heartache. And people still won't realize it. I mean, they still think communism just hasn't been tried well enough yet. And they'll try that with anarchy too, I'm sure, if it gets that far.
Yeah, I don't think any system, I don't think anyone's written a book that lays out a system that 100% will work, because they all kind of, even the really good ones, they all kind of either they straight up say nothing works and humans are inherently going to fuck it up, or they completely ignore that point and pretend like humans aren't most likely going to fuck it up. And they, like you're saying, it's not tethered to that reality and actual human need and how incentivization works in our current human world. It's just not reality.
I think it's possible to come up with a system that works. I mean, to me, a representative republic was the way you dealt with the problem of imperfect ethics and imperfect government based on imperfect ethics. You balance these systems against each other and played them against each other, and that sort of froze them, in a way. The form of government doesn't really matter if the governing principles are inviolable individual rights, and people are very clear about what that means, and that the government's only purpose is retaliatory force, and that it can do no other, it can act in no other capacity than in retaliatory force. When you can solidify that in written law with no contradictions, none of this Rousseauian body politic nonsense or common good bullshit that it confuses people and allows these authoritarian pricks to come in and, with their Munchausen by proxy illness, fuck us all up and then pretend to be our saviors. They ride in on those contradictions. Yep. And they beat us over the head with those contradictions and people's moral doubt about their own self-worth and their sense that, the sacrifice and loss is good. I should be, beaten senseless by this person who's taking all my shit and really aggrandizing themselves and making themselves more powerful, but they're doing it for the common good.
course.
No, man, take that fucking language out, get it out, get rid of it, make it about individual rights, inviolable individual rights, and get some good philosophers in there, political philosophers. There are a few out there who can make that airtight, so that no creepy, Chuck Schumer or Donald Trump can wheedle their skinny little hands in there and try to, use populism to shift power into the areas that they think, will make them bigger and better in the eyes of everybody else, but us worse off.
To go a little bit further down this rabbit hole, what's your opinion on national divorce?
Yeah, I've entertained it, to be honest with you, but here's the problem is the problem is the parties are actually identical in essential ways. And they're like a warring couple who doesn't see how much they actually have in common, and they're fighting about all the little shit. But when I see the left with their postmodernist radical skepticism and nihilism, and the reaction and their collectivism, is just basically what I think that is, and the right's reaction is anti-enlightenment, anti-intellectualism, traditionalism, with a focus on a different collective. I'm seeing two irrationalists, tribes fight at each other over pittances. The divorce should really be those who understand the concept of individual rights and the collectivists. That's the real dividing line. That's the actual binary line in politics. If you're a collectivist or you're an individualist, there's no compromise between the two. There can be no compromise. We've watched over the last 200 plus years what a compromise with collectivism does. It leads us here. Yeah. And worse, and it's going to get worse, provided the right doesn't reject the Enlightenment, which they're already doing, doesn't reject individualism, which they're already doing. They think that the left is being individualistic because they put nose rings on and dye their hair blue and mutilate their bodies or put tattoos on. There's nothing individualistic about that nonsense.
They're all doing it. It's back to the punk rock uniform that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Not only is it a uniform, but they're making conformist statements too, and it's all about a collective think. There's nothing rebellious or individualistic about it. They're blending in with a loud, scary group that they'd rather be a part of than on the outside of.
Yeah. I definitely don't think that a national divorce is any kind of like cure-all, or like that would fix anything, because I 100% agree with you. The parties that still control all 50 of the states are the same evil, corrupt, terrible parties that control the federal government. We're not going to be super better off like right off the bat. Basically where my mind is at is if we went down that road, not that I think it's super likely that anyone ever actually agrees to that, but if we went down that road, it would enable us to maybe get, places like New Hampshire or Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, some of these states that already have fairly small governments, have a fairly individualistic, rights-based government structures, to go more that way, allow all of the people that think like us to move into those areas and kind of be isolated from the collectivists that make up like 80% of the population that are inevitably going to still control 45 of the states after a national divorce.
I think I don't know that they would control that much, but there's definitely city centers that are blue in red states. It's a very complicated phenomenon. Not only do I think there's less ideological misalignment than the rest of the world does. Republicans are so sanctimonious about how different they are from the left, and the left is the same with the right. And I just see them as, they're just collectivists. All of them are just collectivists. But there's all those complicated little jurisdictions within those states that would have to sort of separate themselves as well. And I don't think that would be a very easy phenomenon to to accomplish,
Yeah.
right? And I think people are already voting with their feet. What, 350,000 people, I think, just left California. The largest number of people emigrating out of California in about 10 years, I think.
Yeah.
And they're moving to these states that have more or less better constitutions and better property rights, better tax laws, where they can keep their stuff. God forbid they're living for themselves, which is good. That's what people should do, for crying out loud, instead of expecting somebody else to do their living for them. So it's happening now. I mean, people are moving to Texas, they're moving to Nashville, New Hampshire, Arizona, Florida, something to the Carolinas, I think, are a destination for people who are a little bit more liberty minded. And it's occurring. And I don't know that the demographic shift is going to necessarily change the minds of the political elite. I see them entrenching more deeply in their positions. Gavin Newsom is pretending that he's actually a successful governor in California, despite the fact that hundreds of thousands of tax-paying citizens are leaving.
Well, with every person that leaves, his approval rating goes up.
Well, this is true too, because then there's an influx of that's true. I never looked at it that way, but that's actually true. And then, but we're quickly sort of crashing into that situation where in big cities or intensely leftist states, the middle class is leaving, and you have a sort of neo-feudalistic system of very, very rich people and everybody else who's under them in an almost serf-like sort of manner, right? And that's the only way that kind of heavy centralization and control by the political class can go. There's no other way. There's no other way but a rich and a poor, a politically connected class, and everybody else who's just barely on the margins.
Yeah. Well, so something that I'm sure you've had to deal with a lot with your career choice, and my wife and I are currently we live in New York currently, like upstate, so it's a little bit better. But I want to get out of here. We're back where I grew up, so for family reasons. But we're looking to move and talking about where to move to, and it's tough to kind of balance the places that are good to move my family to, like aligning with my political ideology and stuff like that, good tax laws, good private property rights laws, where a lot of people that I would want to have like an in-person interview on the show are going to be, there's not a whole lot of super awesome, interesting activists and business owners and innovators in, Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's just not a thing. But Wyoming's got great tax laws and gun laws and so many other things. How have you kind of balanced that, like, where the work is versus where you feel comfortable living?
Yeah, well, I haven't quite balanced that yet. My wife and I are still negotiating on a place to live outside of California. So we still have our place in California. But the good thing about a certain turn in the business is everything, and this was developing before COVID, but everything is now done by remote. So you put yourself on tape now for an audition. You don't have to go into a room personally with anyone. In fact, the first audition I did in person in almost 2.5, 3 years was when I went in for Beverly Hills Cop 4, like the second or third time in. I went in person with them. That was the first one. That's the only in-person audition I've had in 4 years, I think. Most all of them have been by videotape, which I like, and partly because you don't have to live in California to be an actor now, mostly because a lot of the acting work is farmed out to parts of Canada, and now, of course, I'm in Pittsburgh right now, working on a show in Pittsburgh, second year of our show, American Rust in Pittsburgh, and all over the place, everywhere but California. So it's we bid on a house in Tennessee, in Nashville. I don't know that that's really my wife's style. And it's hard because along with these pretty good political conditions, there's some social conservatism that I'm not really on the page with, you know what I mean? And a certain religious ideologies, which I'm totally tolerant of and fine, and love having discussions about religion and politics because you clear out parties that way. But I'm not governed by those principles, and I don't think they should be a part of our governing principles. But people in those areas do, and those principles do inform some laws that I find immoral.
Tennessee still has a constitutional law that an atheist cannot hold public office in the state of Tennessee. It's not enforced, but that is still on the books in Tennessee.
That's so funny. Well, there you go. I could go there and not have to worry about running for office.
There you go.
Or I do the rebellious thing and run for office and make a point of the fact that I'm an atheist.
That would be fun. But Tennessee's pretty high up on our list as well, because it does have a lot of the things that we're looking for. And one of the bigger concerns with our argument is that I still like kind of cities. I lived in New York City for 4.5 years. When I'm working, I usually still stay in a city, even if I'm working like a Republican campaign in the country. I still am in like Houston or Austin or something like that. And I like where things are happening and like, a nightlife exists and stuff like that. My wife is very much more of a, small town kind of country vibe kind of person. So we're trying to find places that can balance those two things out, but also balance out like good tax laws, but also legal weed. That's an almost non-existent compromise in any of the states. So
yeah,
it's been fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sort of the same way. I like cities too. And Nashville sort of provided that cool city vibe with arts and, liberal enough folks that it's fun. It's a good place to, lots of stuff to do that are artsy and fun and creative. And also you could get out of it a little bit. We've been on a place in Franklin, which is still within the Nashville city limits. It's a beautiful, quaint little town. But you just don't have all the bullshit that you have in Los Angeles, where schizophrenics are now running the streets and popping off at you and trying to kill you when you're just trying to have a cup of coffee. But my wife also tends to like Europe. I mean, right now she's in Paris, of course, and so we've been thinking about places there. I just don't want to get caught up in their health system, which I think is this decrepit, and I have been caught up in it, so I have anecdotal experience with it that is not fun. And I don't want to get sick over there. I'm worried about that kind of stuff. So we've been looking at pockets of like enterprise zones in Europe that seem promising, like Ireland, Lisbon, which is horrible to the Portuguese, but apparently very good for expats tax wise. And there's a little place called San Remo, I think, somewhere between France and Italy, that is an interesting little enclave. I don't know what to do yet. So right now, with real estate being so weird and volatile and interest rates being so high, I don't want to move at all because I'm stealing my house right now with my fixed rate. So I'd like to find a place with all those amenities that you talked about as well, and I don't know that they coexist anywhere.
Yeah, I liked. We lived in Austin for a short amount of time. We were kind of testing out the waters to see if that's where we wanted to move, and stayed there for, it was probably about 2 months. And then, like I said, we came back for family reasons, and we just had a kid, so we wanted to be close to like the grandparents and everything, and have that backup for that time. But that's still pretty high up on our list, and I think that it might be sort of the answer to not really the question that I asked, but a similar one of like how to balance the work and the politics, is if there's enough like-minded people all pouring into a city center like Austin, where, you know, you've got like the Joe Rogans and the Michael Malices and the Elon Musks all like pouring into a city for these reasons, you might be able to create that like happy medium, you know, perfect storm where, you know, you actually get a good balance.
I hope. I mean, I went to Austin for heart surgery in August, a heart procedure. So it's surgery, but it's more a procedure. And had dinner with Michael Malice, who I love. I love Michael Malice, and Blair White. You know Blair?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Rucka Ali. We had dinner together, and it was cool. I didn't get a chance to really, you know, take in Austin, but it's definitely one of the places that was on our radar. They just have issues with some of the laws that they've passed, and the property taxes are supposed to be pretty crazy.
Yeah, I think to really do it right, you got to live like a solid 45 minutes outside of the city in a different county where the property taxes are not quite up there, and you kind of get away from like the actual Austin Police Department and like that county bureaucracy a little bit. But they have at least one of the things that made it at least somewhat okay is they don't have legal like recreational cannabis, but Austin PD specifically, it's like a non-enforceable offense. So my wife, you know, when she first met me, she was very like not against it completely, but like very, very worried about the fact that like what I was doing was illegal, and like, you know, what happens if you get caught. And so, you know, that was at least a happy medium where I'm not going to go to jail over it. I can't go to a real store and get it, but I'm at least not going to jail over it. And so I don't know. I would like to see them actually legalize it in Texas. I think it's going to happen here fairly soon. There's enough Republican support, but we'll see.
I mean, it's time. It's time.
Yeah.
You know. Oh Lord. I mean, I'm an extremist in that world, and I'm imagining you are. I think all drugs should be legal.
Amen.
Legalized, and then you do away with a few of those alphabet soup agencies that are busting into people's homes and shooting their dogs and are shooting their wives and husbands and you know, seizing their assets. And hey, we could do without that shit.
Yeah. So to tie all this back in, how, you know, you kind of alluded to it earlier. How have you been able to kind of impart some of your worldview and, you know, life ideology onto your students outside of the specifics of acting?
Well, I used to be able to do it a lot more when I was at Playhouse West. You know, I taught there for about 17 or 18 years, and somehow history and politics became a part of inevitably a part of the conversation whenever I was teaching something, because a play would inhabit it, or there would be a value that we'd have to discuss because of a scene that would bring a particular worldview up. And I think also my teacher had a like come to Jesus moment early on in my career there as a student, and he became like this rabid Republican, which I was at the time. I was a registered Democrat, and was a registered Democrat, believe it or not, until probably 6 years ago when I just declined to state my party affiliation.
Nice.
But he introduced me to, he sort of was a conduit for guys like David Horowitz and Dennis Prager and all these people, sort of thought leaders and pundits of the conservative world, and he brought them into our world, and they started this thing called the American Forum, and I would go to these meetings and listen to these right-wing intellectuals talk, and it sort of shifted my consciousness a little bit. And I began to have sympathy more for that side, and I began to read, you know, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, and mostly their syndicated articles in a thing called the Conservative Chronicle. And for a while, I went through a stage that was, I couldn't call myself a conservative because I didn't buy the standard conservative lines, but I definitely was economically in that realm and constitutionally in that realm and liberal in pretty much every other way. But it shifted my consciousness. And then Ayn Rand, of course, turned me completely into something that I can't be in either camp comfortably. And those principles bleed into everything, including art. So, a philosophy is also is an ethics, it's a politics, and it's an aesthetics. And so my sense of aesthetics would become a part of teaching. And so it's either that the scene would lead me to values that would make me talk about ethics. The scene would lead me to values that would make me talk about a historical moment or a political moment in time. And that would, sometimes evolve into an interesting conversation. Or my sense of aesthetics I would sort of bleed that into the conversation. And then the conversation would become about art itself and what art is and what art's place is in human life. And I would challenge their perspectives with respect to that, and they would challenge mine. I learned quite a bit from people who knew a lot more about art than I did. I had a philosophical premise about art, but they knew a lot of more particulars, and that healthy engagement, I think, it was a great exchange for all of us.
Yeah, I think, man, I had something, you said something that I had a follow-up, and then you kept talking and I was listening so intently that I lost my follow-up. I think last time we had a conversation a little bit about kind of how it's a lot of life philosophy gets mixed up with political philosophy, and it gets murkier once you start adding politics into it. And it's a lot cleaner to just teach and aspire towards a specific life philosophy of, like, a do no harm, individualistic, rights-based philosophy, where I think, once you get away from the pragmatic world of politics, where you have to be after a vote instead of an actual changed mind, it really just switches up how you're looking at stuff. So I think it's a lot easier, in my experience at least, to try to learn it as a philosophy that you're just doing. And sometimes that interacts with politics in a way that makes you vote this way or volunteer this way, but that's not what it's about.
I agree. I mean, I do think, as I said before, politics is an expression of ethics on a social scale. So talk about ethics. Yeah. Talk about ethics. And eventually, if somebody's vibing with what you're saying, they're going to come to the political conclusions on their own.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to shout out your show, what you've been up to, what you got going on coming up that you're excited about, anything you want to plug.
Yeah, I'm super excited about American Rust. Previously on Showtime, I think it's on Freevee now. Forgive me, gods of network TV, if I'm messing that up, but it's a really, really awesome show. Jeff Daniels and Moira Tierney are in it, and me, and a cast of really great young folks. And the scripts this year are phenomenal. There's so much scary, cool stuff happening in every episode. It's going to leave you on the edge of your seat, waiting for the next one to come out. So I'm really excited for that to come out, and bummed when it's going to be over. But when it's over in May, I'm going to travel to Paris and start trying to influence young Parisian folks that this style of acting is good, and maybe my aesthetics and philosophy and ethics might be a good thing to look into as well.
Nice. Well, guys, the links are all in the description to follow Mark's YouTube and to get to playhouseparis.org, which is also, right there. If you want to go on, find out more stuff, check him out. I'm assuming if you're watching this, you already know how awesome Mark is, but if you don't, go figure it out. Mark, thanks so much for coming on. This was fantastic.
Thanks for having me again. It's awesome. Right. Awesome talking to you.
Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us this evening. We will be back here next week with another episode of Fight for Liberty Live. But until then, keep up the fight.
Wow.